Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hello, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thank you so very much for watching and downloading in more than 150 countries around the world and making the Exam Room one of the most consumed nutrition podcasts anywhere on the planet today. And in this episode, we are talking about the not so sweet ramifications that come from having a sweet tooth, specifically on your digestion, your gut health, your microbiome, gastrointestinal disorders, you name it. But then we're going to kind of flip the script a little bit. Talk about some healthier options that can still perhaps satisfy your cravings without disrupting the 38 trillion microbes floating around in your belly. And there is only one man on this planet who can talk to us about this. Dr. B, the gut health MD, the prince of poop, the pharaoh of fiber, the Mac Daddy of microbiome. He is here with us to elevate our gut health IQs. So we got a lot to get into: real sugar, fake sugar, natural sugar substitutes, Crohn's disease, inflammation, harmful bacteria, IBS, and beyond. You name it. If it has to do with the gut, we're getting into it and sugar today with a sweet soul of a man, Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Chuck, it is too sweet to see you, my friend.
Well played. Well played. If you know, you know. Well done, sir. Glad to have you here. Glad to be part of our clique. All right, let's talk about this. Sugar and the gut health. Flat out, is it possible to have a really healthy gut environment and still have an enormous sweet tooth?
Well, I think the current state of affairs in the United States, Chuck, is completely unbalanced. You can have a sweet tooth and be a healthy person if you're making the right choices and balancing it out with a preponderance, a dominant effect of the plant-based foods that contain fiber in your diet. And unfortunately, the issue that we currently have is that this is not the approach that we're taking. In fact, 95%, if not more, of Americans are deficient in their fiber intake, yet we're virtually all excessive in our sugar intake because sugar is everywhere and hidden in things that it just doesn't even make sense for it to be there, yet it is there. And this is how we get ourselves into trouble when we're excessively consuming sugar and completely inadequately consuming fiber. Then we have a problem because then our gut bugs are feasting on the wrong food.
All right, so let me ask you this hypothetically. If somebody were to eat maybe 5 king-size Snickers bars and then follow that up with a pound of kale, would one offset the other?
No, it would not offset. You can't offset 5 Snickers bars. And obviously with Snickers bars, there's more to a Snickers bar than even the sugar, to be honest with you. I mean, that's a bit, you threw me a little bit of a curveball there, Chuck, but you're still a sweet guy. I still love you. So it's a sweet love fest here, folks. But no, you can't completely offset it. What you can do, and there are studies where people, for example, eat a Western diet. Where I'm gonna venture away from sugar for a quick moment just to demonstrate the effect here. There are studies where people eat sausage McMuffins and hash browns for breakfast, and they track what happens to the blood levels of something called bacterial endotoxin. Now, bacterial endotoxin is released when there's damage to our microbiome, damage to our gut barrier, and this toxin that you find in the inflammatory bacteria manages to cross the gut barrier into the bloodstream and activates the immune system. So this bacterial endotoxin is a tremendous problem, and it's sort of the classic example of what many people describe as leaky gut. And so they did this study, Chuck, where they had people consuming Egg McMuffins and hash browns, and they saw that the bacterial endotoxins were like cranking up to a massive degree after that meal. And when they added simply fiber to the meal, did it normalize the bacterial endotoxin? No, of course not. It still went up, but you were able to, what we say, attenuate. Attenuate means that you're reducing the impact. That doesn't mean that, like, this is not an argument in favor of eating junk food and then adding a little bit of fiber to the mix. This is an argument for us to be, instead of eating those Snickers bars, moving towards something that we enjoy just as much, but is actually good for us. So, and there's many examples of what that might be. Like, I immediately have raspberries come to mind because I love them.
I was just talking about, speaking of Snickers bars, this like popped into my head. I was just talking the other day with somebody about how much they enjoyed the recipe that you gave for the um, Snickers substitute with the date and the peanut and the little chocolate morsels, and they are just in seventh heaven every time that they eat that. How does the microbiome react to your natural Snickers bar versus that refined thing? Are we much safer, healthier when we opt for the dates and the dry roasted peanuts as opposed to diving in for the king size Snickers with the, caramel and the nougat and all of that good stuff?
Well, I mean, the beauty of the dates is that it also includes the fiber, and it's a whole plant food. Now, would I sit here and advocate that you make this the centerpiece of your diet and like excessively consume dates all day? No, I would not. That's not reasonable or something that people should do. But that being said, like if you were to, instead of taking an actual Snickers bar and instead make my healthy Snickers bites, all you do is you take a date. All right, and of course the seed is removed, or you remove the seed, and you split it in half, and you take that half and you wipe a smear of your favorite nut butter on that date. It could be peanut butter, almond butter, cashew butter, whatever it may be. And then you put a sprinkle of nice dark chocolate chips, and you can add some sesame seeds to this if you like. And the issue is when you have it presented in this form, you get the flavor, you get the gooiness that the caramel normally would give you from the date. You get the chocolate effect, obviously from the chocolate, and the peanut butter or nut butter adds the same thing that you get from the nuts. So in the end product, it's like you're tricking your taste buds, because if you closed your eyes, you would think it's a Snickers bar in your mouth. But instead, what you have is something that actually contains fiber, contains a high amount of polyphenols, and is basically going to feed and fuel your gut microbiome to be healthier. Now, should we make this the centerpiece of our diet? No, but you eat a delicious plant-based meal. That's your lunch or your dinner. And then you follow it up with one or two of these Snickers bites. Dude, I'm in seventh heaven, and you would be too, and so are your gut bugs.
All about them, and they are delicious. I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of what it boils down to. If you got something that's healthy and it's delicious, go for it. Enjoy it. Let's open up the doctor's mailbag and take a question here from Kathy. Kathy is wondering about what a lot of people would refer to as real sugar. You may know it as table sugar. Kathy, though, clearly has a high health IQ. She calls it refined sugar. And she's wondering if you could elaborate on the effect that refined sugar has on our gut bacteria. Does it really get in there and just jack things up the way that, this kind of nefarious picture has been painted?
The emerging science would say yes. There's actually three things that I would like to talk about with this, Chuck. So remind me in case I forget. Number 2 is the CGMs, and number 3 is SIBO. Okay.
Gotcha.
All right. Cool.
CGMs and SIBO.
Let's dive in. So the interesting thing about sugar, and when we say sugar, we're really talking about refined carbohydrates. And refined carbohydrates, in and of themselves, are a bit unnatural, because there's processing that's required in order to accomplish that. And so when we do that processing, we're breaking it down into something that's like, it previously was a part of food that was complex, included complex carbohydrates, which are fiber. And now what we're doing is we're extracting it, and then we're breaking it into the smallest piece possible. And when you break it into the smallest piece possible, it leads to rapid absorption. And because of this, many people say, well, the gut microbiome is in the colon. It must not get to the colon. It must not affect the microbiome. And unfortunately, the reality of our research is that this is untrue. So, and we're going to move through these three things, Chuck. So number 1, they've done studies. By the way, many times these studies are complementary. They are paired in a complementary way with unhealthy fats. So they will do this high sugar, high fat diet. And of course, in the plant-based world, we often talk about salt, oil, and sugar, right? And so now there's an entire nuanced conversation there that should be had. But that being said, unhealthy fats and refined carbohydrates are problematic and not good for our microbiome. And in animal model studies, what they have consistently found is that it has a negative effect on the gut bugs. You shift towards more inflammatory gut bugs. Because you have this negative effect on the gut bugs, it actually disrupts the gut barrier. And when you disrupt the gut barrier, you are now allowing things to cross that barrier and access the immune system. 70% of your immune system lives in the lining of your gut, and it activates inflammatory pathways. So this is a setup for inflammation. Now, we're talking about sugar, but when we say refined carbohydrates, I think we should mention this includes flour. There are healthier forms of flour, but like to me, white flour is white sugar. There's not a profound difference between the two. Now, in these studies, Chuck, they actually found that the mice, the sugar was affecting their cognition, which is quite bizarre and weird. And I would dismiss that as, well, we're not mice, we're humans. We eat very differently, we behave very differently, and our biology is different. But the problem is that actually there's human data too, Chuck, that sugar intake does affect the way that our brain functions. We become impulsive with our food choices. We become obsessed with getting more. And it blurs the line between hunger and satiety. Have you ever, Chuck, out of curiosity, before I move forward with the discussion here, I want to kick this back to you. Have you ever been sitting there at any time? You know, this could have been 10 years ago, but have you ever been sitting there and sort of like gorging on food and not really understood why you're even eating?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was the compulsive obsession, and I remember even being pulled and called to it, even when I knew that I wasn't even really hungry. You know,
This,
I famously talk about just like I had to have it, and that was all that my brain knew at that point.
this is what I'm talking about. And they've actually shown that sugar is one of the things that can have this effect, is not only making us impulsive, compulsive, but also making us confused about whether we're even hungry at all. So then you have that compulsion, and you're like, I don't think I'm actually hungry. I don't think I am, but I feel like I got to eat. And so you do. And you eat more junk food, which reinforces this vicious cycle. So I think it's important for people to understand that I just mentioned how sugar affects the gut. Now I'm talking to you about how sugar affects the brain, and the brain and the gut are completely intertwined and connected. This is the brain gut connection. You can't separate the two. And here's yet another example on display of the brain gut connection and how powerful this can potentially be, not just in mice, also in us humans. And I think we've all lived through those moments of feeling obsessed, impulsive, and not really sure if we're even hungry, but we're going to eat the food anyway because we feel like we're supposed to. Okay. All right. Number two, before I do CGMs, let me do SIBO. Chuck, SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, is this condition where people have an excessive growth of bacteria in their small intestine. Now, we could talk about this, like unpack this in great detail. This could be an entire episode. It's complex. It's nuanced. There's a lot to this. But if I were to really boil it down, it's actually pretty straightforward what's going on. You have disruption and damage to the gut microbiome, and we would call this dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is our term that really we're kind of saying the same thing as leaky gut, but this is what a scientist would say. It's dysbiosis. And that's what's happening with SIBO, and it affects these bacteria that are growing in an inappropriate way in your small intestine. Scientists ask the question, what causes SIBO? And how can we protect ourselves from SIBO? This was, by the way, published in the journal Nature Communications, and completely changed my mind about several things when it comes to this condition. And what they found was that people who consumed more refined carbohydrates, including sugar, were actually at much higher risk for SIBO. And those who were consuming higher amounts of complex carbohydrates, like fiber, were at much lower risk for SIBO. And this is something for us to be aware of, that number one, here are the takeaways. Excessive intake of refined carbohydrates and inadequate intake of complex carbohydrates induces dysbiosis. This is part of the point of the study. But the other part of the point of this study is that when a person actually has SIBO, and I'm guessing that some of the people who are here with us right now have had this condition or know someone who has this condition, conventional training, conventional teaching is to cut your fiber intake because fiber causes bloating. All right. I don't want you to suffer. I don't want you miserable. This doesn't mean that you should eat all the kale in the entire world, but there's a way in which you should be introducing fiber because fiber is necessary in order to restore the gut to an appropriate balance. So I think this is one of the key sort of takeaways here is that this world that we live in with too much sugar and not enough fiber, it's a problem. And we're seeing study after study in their own unique ways, including SIBO, demonstrate this to us in terms of the effect on the gut microbiome. Anything you want to talk about there, Chuck, or should we move on to my third thing?
I think that we should actually do an entire episode devoted to SIBO. And what I've learned recently is that there are multiple forms of it, and the testing is not necessarily always 100% accurate. There are some that it works better on than others. There's a lot to unpack there, but I think that a lot of people probably suffer from it that don't even realize that that's what's going on. And I know it's also difficult to diagnose. I don't think that a lot of gastroenterologists, at least in my experience, go to SIBO straight away either. So let's save that for a whole other show, man, because there's a whole lot to get into. And I'm pretty sure right now the chat and the people who are listening to the podcast are just like, yes, SIBO special, bring it on, boys, because that's what we need in our lives.
Cool.
But yeah, let's talk about CGMs though before we move on to the next question. So
Okay.
you wanted to mention CGMs. Talk to us.
Yeah, I do. Before I mention CGMs, let me just say real quick, I want to show this mug right here. This is my son, Liam. You can see his name, 2021. And I just want to platform my son for some beautiful artwork that I'm very proud of to share on the show with all the good people here.
Boy, Liam,
So,
well done, sir. Well done.
Yes. Hopefully he's downstairs tuning into the exam room along with everyone else. You should share it with your kids, people.
That's it, man. That's it.
All right. So CGMs, here's where it gets interesting, Chuck. So you remember I mentioned that like there's this theory that people have had where they're like a little bit like resistant to accept that sugar could affect the microbiome because sugar is absorbed, so it never gets to the small gets down to the colon where the microbes live. So we should just assume that it's totally fine, no issue there, right? Okay. The fascinating thing about this is that, I mean, I think we all know when you eat a diet that's high in refined carbohydrates and low in fiber, you spike your blood sugar. And this is where these like continuous glucose monitors, which by the way, including with Zoe, I'll mention a little more on this in a moment. Like Zoe is more than just the CGM, but this is where the continuous glucose monitors come into play because they can measure this. And what's fascinating, Chuck, is that they've discovered that your blood sugar actually impacts gut barrier function. So when you consume sugar, it's not that the sugar is necessarily feeding the bacteria in your colon. In fact, part of what's happening is because there's an immediate rise in your blood sugar. That immediate rise in your blood sugar is actually breaking down your gut barrier, disrupting it, and then it's basically putting you in a metabolic and immune position of injury. Okay, so it's messing up your metabolism and your immune system because you're basically disrupting your gut barrier with this high blood sugar. So now this is fascinating because Zoe has done separate independent research on over 4,000 people where they looked at, these are, by the way, people who do not have diabetes. Because there are some who say, well, you should only use a CGM in a person who has diabetes. Blood sugar does not matter in people who do not have diabetes. And the problem with that argument is like I'm arguing right now that high blood sugar in a person without diabetes disrupts the gut barrier. So yes, it is a problem. And actually, it's interesting, Chuck, because what I'm saying is that when the gut barrier is intact, it helps you to have a strong metabolism. And when you break down the gut barrier, it actually impairs your metabolism. And in our research at Zoe, we've actually found exactly that. So we have 4,000 people, and we looked at their CGM tracings, and we saw when they basically went out of bounds on their CGM tracings. And what we discovered is that the people who go out of bounds and excessively high on their blood sugar in a normal population, they don't have diabetes, these are people that have higher cardiovascular risk over the next 10 years. Meanwhile, those who keep it tight are ones who have lower cardiovascular risk. Now, that's not to say that there's not more nuance to this. There is. But I think that like what we're seeing here are different pieces of evidence that are all pointing in the same direction. And this is how we come to consensus in terms of the way that the body works.
All right, let's get to some more here, man. That was a nice in-depth answer to kick things off, man. That was amazing. Good deals. All right, so we've talked about real sugar or table sugar or refined sugar and refined carbohydrates, but now let's switch over to what a lot of people assume are healthier alternatives because a lot of times 0 calories in these things. Melissa, also with a high health IQ here today. How about this? How does the frequent use of artificial sweeteners influence the composition and function of the gut microbiome? Can we get her some continuing education credits just for writing the question like that? That is well done, Melissa. Amazing.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think it's interesting because there's an entire debate that exists around artificial sweeteners. And that's because some people who are like all about calorie counting, which I am not, they love artificial sweeteners because from their perspective, if you eliminate sugar and replace it with an artificial sweetener, you are reducing your caloric intake and that can help you to potentially lose weight. And the problem is that there has been evidence that started to emerge about 10 years ago, but yet the drumbeat is picking up and getting louder and becoming increasingly clear that artificial sweeteners disrupt and damage the gut microbiome and actually leave our metabolism impaired as a result of this. People who consume artificial sweeteners at that particular meal, because that sweetener is not absorbed, their blood sugar may be under better control. The problem is that at their next meal, whatever carbohydrates are in that meal, they're going to spike their blood sugar because the artificial sweetener has now affected their metabolism. So the concern from my perspective is that artificial sweeteners impair and damage the gut microbiome. By impairing and damaging the gut microbiome, they're impairing and damaging the gut barrier. And we impair, as we have just mentioned in the last 5 minutes, when we impair and damage the gut barrier, we actually are impairing and damaging our metabolism and our immune system. And that is where the concern with artificial sweeteners currently exists.
All right, let's see what else we got here today. We got a lot of great ones here. When I mentioned we were going to talk about sugars, like boom, man, my email just got flooded, just like the chat room right now.
Ding, ding, ding.
What's that?
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding, ding. I
going
mean,
off.
it just, I really, I had to put my phone in the other room just because it kept vibrating even. It's like you turn the sound off and bzz, 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 bzz. Why? Because people love them some sweets. Pete is one of those people. Pete is wondering what sugar substitutes, though. Speaking of sugar substitutes, what are some that could actually be a little bit healthier for the microbiome? A lot of people might be leaning towards stevia in this arena.
Highly debatable on stevia. There's some evidence that it's actually harmful to the microbiome. So it's hard for me to sit here and say that we should just grab stevia and make it our go-to. You know, if I'm forced to, I would create a hierarchy. Now, let me say that when I drink my coffee, I drink it black. 10 years ago, or maybe a little more than 10 years ago, maybe 12, it was 3 Splendas per coffee, multiple coffees per day. Okay. That was not good. That's part of the reason that I was 50 pounds overweight. Now, if I'm forced to, I would create a hierarchy. And at the top of that hierarchy, I would put versions of whole plant foods that are naturally sweet. So to me, that starts with things like berries. Like you can eat them whole as a snack. You can freeze them. They're quite delicious. But you can also like mash them and even like mash them and heat them to create almost like a compote that you can put over your pancakes or something like this, all right, as a substitute for maple syrup. So I start with the fruit at the top. That includes dates, by the way. And then like just below that, I would put things like applesauce as an example. And then as we move down beyond that, the problem with like, for example, maple syrup and honey is that although it does contain some polyphenols, which may be beneficial, it's still really just massively refined sugar, refined carbohydrates. So it starts to get quite debatable in this place. I don't want to sit here and advocate for monk fruit, making it sound like we should seek out monk fruit in our life. But I think that there is a reality that there's going to be like we're all going to want to sweeten certain things when we consume them. And I tend to favor monk fruit, and that's based upon limited evidence, admittedly, limited evidence, but evidence that indicates to me that monk fruit actually has an antioxidant effect and may be beneficial to our gut microbiome. So that's what I tend to favor when we're getting into sweetener alternatives. I would put the monk fruit above the stevia. I would put the stevia one rung down from the monk fruit. And then like as we get towards the bottom, that's where I put the artificial sweeteners and like refined sugar.
Alternatively, what are the ones that we should absolutely be avoiding at all costs? Pete's wondering about that as well.
I mean, I think it's the artificial sweeteners from my perspective. A quick example. So we've already mentioned how they disrupt the microbiome. If you came to my clinic, not you personally, Chuck, or Pete, maybe it's Pete. Pete comes to my clinic and says, "Hey, doc, I'm having chronic diarrhea." Probably the first question I'm going to ask them is, do you consume dairy and do you use artificial sweeteners? And if the answer to the question is yes, with artificial sweeteners, yes, I drink a Diet Coke every day. Eliminate that. And let's see what happens. And you would be shocked at how many people who have chronic diarrhea are actually better.
You know, that reminds me. I mean, I was just dumb in high school. A lot of us were, by no fault of our own. We were just young and stupid. We used to do this thing called the Certs Challenge, where could you eat an entire pack of Certs without having to go to the restroom and spend some time on the throne there? So I'm guessing then it would have been the artificial sweeteners in those breath mints that were causing the trots. Correct?
Gosh, that is a blast from the past. I haven't thought about certs. Are they even around anymore?
I have no idea. I just remember loving those things because you could bite down into them in a dark room and see the spark. And I thought that was the coolest thing,
Wow.
and so why? I don't know.
I didn't
I
know
don't know the
that.
science. Yeah, dude. But what I do know is that, 20 certs are better than one until you have to, make your run. And then you had a little bit of HE double hockey sticks to pay. So, stupid us in high school, but I'm assuming though, whatever they sweetened it with was probably what was causing us to ditch class there for a few
Yeah,
minutes.
I don't remember what was in certs instead of this in terms of the sweeteners, but I do think that like this kind of exposes these general ideas of why there are concerns there.
That's a whole other show. The dumb stuff that we did in high school has nothing to do with anything that we usually talk about here on the show,
Oh
though.
gosh.
Interesting question from Jenny. Let's talk about the naturally occurring sugar that is found in fruit. Jenny says that
Yeah.
sometimes when she eats fruit, she gets all kinds of bloated. So, what might be going on there?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, before we address the actual bloating, which isn't necessarily indicative of the fruit causing any harm to your body, there's potentially a very clear, reasonable explanation for this. Let's start with the fact that to me, the vilification of fruit is insane. It makes absolutely no sense because when people consume fruit, they reduce their risk of diabetes. And if anything, from a weight perspective, they lose weight provided they are not going completely ridiculous and overboard on consuming fruit. So, I mean, I'm not a believer in a fruitarian diet where all you eat is fruit all day. I'll just be upfront about that. There's many forms of plant-based or vegan diets that I would never advocate for and say that they're healthy just because they contain plants. That's a bit crazy. But anyway, fruit is in fact healthy and good for us. It's part of a balanced, healthful diet. It contributes to the diversity within our diet, and diversity, of course, is how we feed and fuel our gut microbiome. The problem is that fruit, most of the time, is going to contain fructose. It could be other stuff, but fructose is the classic. And the presence of fructose in its native state within fruit does not mean that it's implicitly bad. It is not. But there are people who struggle to process and digest fructose. And this is called fructose intolerance. It's a form of food intolerance. And this is actually under an umbrella that exists called FODMAPs, FODMAP intolerance. FODMAPs includes fructose, which you find in fruit, and lactose, which you, of course, find in dairy, and fructans, which are different. They're not fructose. Fructans, which you find in wheat, barley, rye, and also garlic and onions. And also galactans, which you'll find in legumes. And then finally, polyols, which are sugar alcohols that can naturally occur sometimes in fruit or also be artificial sweeteners. So anyway, the fructose may be causing bloating because this person has fructose intolerance. The process to overcoming and healing this is actually through the gut microbiome. And there's a number of ways that you can do that, but it starts first with moderation of your intake of fruit. So don't eat too much at one sitting and ease your way into it, because over time your body will become more adapted and more efficient at processing and digesting it.
So let me ask you this then. Walt has an interesting follow-up, wondering whether a ripe banana could affect the microbiome gut health a little bit differently than a green banana. Obviously, the riper ones are going to be much more sweet, so I'm assuming that's going to come into play here for it.
Yeah, as a banana ripens, there's a natural movement away from more complex polysaccharides and starches towards more broken down, refined sugars and starches. And this is why a ripe banana is so sweet, and in some cases too sweet, especially when it's brown. But when it's green, it's not nearly as sweet. And it's also much more rigid and hard, requires more chewing. And that's because that green banana actually contains resistant starches. And those resistant starches, you can think of them as great forms of fiber because they're technically not fiber, but they behave in the same way, which is that they are not digested by the human intestine. They travel down to the colon, and in the colon, the microbes actually consume them and transform them into short chain fatty acids. So anyway, that's the beauty of a green banana. And when I'm given the choice, if I can palate it, I would rather consume the green banana, such as if I'm making a smoothie, then I tend to favor more on the green side and certainly not on the brown side.
Yeah, man, but those ripe bananas, they just taste better to me at the end of the day. I hear you, and I know there's a lot of
Well, it's
upside
not a
to the
bad
green
thing. I'm not
bananas.
arguing that ripe bananas you should not eat. I certainly would not argue that, right? I think there's a place for eating bananas, and again, it's part of like incorporating them in a diet that includes other stuff too.
I know sometimes though, if I go overboard with a banana in a smoothie and I make like 3 super sweet bananas in there with, kale and cacao and black beans, my usual chocolate smoothie that I love so much, blueberries, strawberries. I noticed that I will get some heartburn in there though. Only when I add that extra banana. And maybe it's because there's just a little bit too much of that sweet in there and it's just messing with my gut. I don't know. You said there were kids watching, so I'm just trying to make some fun words up.
It's for the kids out there.
It is, man. Rated G for good. All right, let's talk about leaky gut. Michael has a question wondering a high sugar diet can contribute to the development of leaky gut syndrome. What do you
Yeah,
think, Dr. B?
100%. I mean, this is what we saw in our conversation between both the layers of evidence that apply to mice and what they see in the mouse models, to SIBO, and the fact that in humans they have demonstrated that small bowel dysbiosis takes place when people consume more sugar. And finally, the use of the CGM and the fact that when we have high blood sugar spikes as a result of sugar in our diet, that it actually can disrupt our gut barrier, which is leaky gut. So yes, I think that the sugar is clearly a contributor.
David wondering kind of the same thing. IBS. I mean, we were just talking about the CERT challenge. So I would assume kind of the same can be said for IBS in this case.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's not the IBS and SIBO are not necessarily the exact same thing, but we are talking on the same sort of spectrum of like the root cause is the same.
All right. Let me see. What else do we have here? Ooh. All right. Do you want a 301 level question? Because Jason's bringing the heat, man. I just got to get you mentally prepared for this one.
Come at me.
All right. Here we
I
go.
want it. I want it.
It's teed up. Jason, in what ways does sugar impact the production of function of short chain fatty acids in the gut? 301. Jason, going for the master's degree.
Dude, I'm dunking on this. This is it's quite clear that sugar actually reduces the production of short chain fatty acids. And the reason why is because sugar itself does not, it would never produce short chain fatty acids one way or the other. But the problem is that sugar actually disrupts and damages the gut microbiome. And in the process of doing this, there's a skew away from the gut bugs that produce short chain fatty acids and towards the ones that do not. And so the problem with this skew that's taking place is that then your next meal, you get back on track, you go to consume fiber. That's great, but you're not going to get as many short chain fatty acids from that fiber as you would have had if the last meal did not have the sugar. So, Chuck, it kind of brings up an interesting concept called the second meal effect. Have you heard of the second meal effect?
Talk to me about the second meal, my friend.
Okay, so the second meal effect, which is most commonly attributed to the intake of legumes, and that's because legumes are microbiome foods, high in fiber, resistant starches, and polyphenols. But really, this effect is not just legumes. It could be other plant-based foods that have fiber, resistant starches, and polyphenols. What they found is that when you consume, for example, lentils at, let's say, lunch, that it will actually impact your blood sugar at the next meal. So what they did in these studies is they varied what people had at lunch. One person had the lentils and someone had something else. And then they would feed them the same dinner and see different effects because of what you had at lunch, even though they're eating the same meal at dinner. And if we start to think about this in a circular way of how these things all feed back into one another, that's quite fascinating, because not only does the fiber and the resistant starches help you to control your blood sugar at lunch, but the fact that it improves your blood sugar at dinner, based upon what we have been discussing here today, Chuck, in terms of blood sugar control and the effect on the gut barrier, that basically means that there is a lasting effect that starts to carry forward of protecting your microbiome beyond that first meal. So the second meal effect is blood sugar related, but I would argue it's also microbiome related.
The second meal. All right, man. We're learning
And it's the short chain
today.
fatty acids. It's the short chain fatty acids, specifically propionate, that are responsible for that. So it truly is the fiber and resistant starches.
Dude, I love you, man. We just threw a 301 level question at you, and you're like, I'm dunking on this. I got
Dude,
this. I love
come
this.
at me. Come at me,
Dude,
bro.
I'm not
I want
playing
it.
in your
I
paint.
want it. I
I'm
want
not.
it. I like the
I can't
challenge.
play in your paint, man. I can't play
I
in
like
your
the
paint.
challenge.
I know you do. All right, Jason. You step it up next time, buddy. I want 401 level. Let's go, buddy. All right. All right. We just talked about IBS and leaky gut. Ashley is wondering, is that kind of the same when you're eating a lot of sugar for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis? Does the risk go up there as well?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that the issue is that it increases the risk of having a flare. And, the challenge that people with these conditions have is that they have a very deep dysbiosis, meaning very damaged gut microbiome. So they struggle to process and digest complex polysaccharides like fiber. And that is the challenge or problem that we have for these particular people, is that we ultimately want to restore a healthy gut microbiome. These conditions, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, they are actually microbiome diseases. Believe it or not, this is a little bit weird. We no longer think of them as being autoimmune. Because truly autoimmune means that your immune system is attacking your own body. Your immune system is not attacking your own body in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. It's attacking your microbiome. Your immune system has decided that your microbiome is the enemy and is rejecting it. So we want to restore a friendly, healthy microbiome that your immune system will be like, oh, there's my old friend. I don't need to attack you anymore. And the way that we accomplish that is with dietary fiber and reducing our sugar intake. It's just the challenge of getting there. It takes time.
All right, and let's end with kind of a fun question. I'm a little bit nervous about
These
asking
ones
this
haven't
one.
been fun. These ones haven't been fun.
They
Come on,
they
Chuck.
have been, man, but I think that this is like this next clip. I can guarantee you is going to get pulled and isolated and put up on Reels and Facebook and all that good stuff.
Oh dear, here we go.
And it's just kind of a lesser.
Now
of
I
two
am
evils.
nervous. Now I am nervous.
Because look, the old me would have interpreted this question as, well, I'm just going to choose the lesser of two evils and go with that, because I would then convince myself that at least that is a healthier option than the other. And as long as I can somehow finagle the word healthy into my thought process, it's going to be okay. So, with that preface, Kevin is wondering, are sodas worse than sweet foods for microbiome and gut health? So, does it matter whether it's a liquid or a cupcake? What would your expertise say there?
The issue with sugar containing beverages and also artificially sweetened beverages is that there's no brakes on the car. It's just straight gas. And that's the problem with them, is that you have nothing to slow down the introduction of these sugars and artificial sweeteners into the body. Whereas sweet foods, there's different versions of sweet foods, and they could potentially be great for you. Sweet foods could be a bowl of berries. Sweet foods could be a mango or a Snickers bite, or an ice cream, or dark chocolate. And all of these things actually are good for the microbiome. So let's not vilify sweets. You are allowed to enjoy sweet food. And you also are allowed to not be perfect, because none of us are, including myself. But given the choice, when we're choosing between one or the other, I prefer to opt for the stuff that's beneficial to my body and also satisfies my sweet tooth. So I'm going for that list of foods that I just mentioned.
Yeah, but you know what? My gut here says that Kevin's probably not thinking about a Snickers bite that's in the fiber fueled book. I think Kevin's probably thinking about a regular Snickers bar or a slice of white sheet cake or something like that. Obviously, maybe a trace of fiber in the sheet cake, a little bit more in the Snickers with the peanuts. Would that still make them healthier options than a regular Coca-Cola, because there's even just a little bit of brakes on that car?
I mean,
I
I
this is
suppose.
it, man.
Yeah, I
That's
suppose.
yeah.
And I don't want to sit here and say that there's no place for cake. That's not accurate. And like, when it's my kid's birthday, guess who's eating cake? You better believe it. You better believe it. You better believe it.
I like
But am
the
I eating cake
honesty.
every week? Am I eating cake every week? Absolutely not. Right? Because I have alternative choices that I can make my more steady, consistent thing. A one-off is not a big deal. It's
Yeah.
just when you make it a consistent choice. And if we're making a consistent choice, then I say, no, get that garbage out of here to both of those. And instead, let me replace this with something that's going to be better for me. So if it's soda and I want that carbonation, let me have a little bit of kombucha with mostly water. And if it's a sweet tooth like that, then we've already talked about a lot of the choices that are alternatives.
But what happens like if you don't eat the cake all that often and you are the kind of person that can just have it once in a while and not have to go back to it again and again and again? Like, does your microbiome, like once you eat that slice of cake, does it wonder like what the frig is this? Like this is so different.
Okay, so this we're coming full circle here. We're coming full circle here, Chuck. If you eat the cake, I think we all know you feel great for about 30 seconds, right? And it's enough to like make your eyes bulge out of your head a little bit and be like, yo, this is what I've been missing. Welcome back. And that's that part of your brain that gets activated by these refined carbohydrates that makes you impulsive and compulsive and confused about whether you're even hungry or full, right? But for 30 seconds, it's glorious. And the problem is then you spend the next 3 hours with no wind in your sails, low energy, feeling like trash. And you're wondering, what might that be? And it's not purely a blood sugar effect, although it can be that your blood sugar dipped too far down. That can be part of it. But Chuck, it's also that I'm of the belief, based on what we've been discussing today, that you have disrupted your gut microbiome, and now you are paying the price of a disrupted gut microbiome that's going to basically be leaking endotoxin into your blood for the next few hours. So, and it's the same effect that you see with alcohol and other things like this that do the same thing.
Right on. There you go. Asked and answered. Let me ask you this as we wrap up here. 38 Tera, the launch went phenomenally well. That's got just a little bit of sweet in there. Are you using monk fruit there to bring in a little bit of a pop of the sweet there, or what's the sweetener?
Yeah. There's a little bit of monk fruit in 38 Terra,
That's so good.
the daily microbiome nutrition, and and part of that is just accomplishing a flavor profile that people love. Because ultimately, what I want is I want them to elevate their gut microbiome through consistent daily use. That's what the product is designed for. Consistent daily use. Because when you do this on a once a day basis, it's like a multivitamin for your gut microbes, and you're building a health habit. And this is how we snowball into momentum of a healthier gut. So now the monk fruit, the reason why it's in there of among all the choices that are available is that, again, when I reviewed the monk fruit among those choices, it's the preferred choice because it seems to have an antioxidant effect that's beneficial to the gut bugs. What does that mean? I want you to seek it out? No, absolutely not. But in this sort of context, that makes a lot of sense.
There you go, man. And I know that you guys completely sold out of 38T already, but there's a wait list. People can go to 38terra.com, I believe, and get on the wait list for when everything has been replenished.
Yeah, we are a small company and just getting started. Like many times, for example, if you go to 38 Terra, our social media, you're probably talking to me many times. And so we are a small company. We're just getting started. The demand was amazing, and I'm very grateful for my community and supporters who are interested in this. And I sincerely believe that this is going to be something that really helps a lot of people out there who need this. So to me, this is a version 2.0, version 3.0, whatever you want to call it. This is a higher version of the fiber supplements that have been out there. And it's completely gut microbiome targeted for beneficial effect. That's the way that I formulated it. I formulated it myself. I'm very proud of it. And so for those who are interested, just know, like, we're taking steps to address the demand for this product. I think it's wonderful. Unfortunately, I can't fulfill for everyone right now. I wish I could. So join the priority list. And when the time comes, we'll make sure to get this to you so you can try it out, and hopefully with great beneficial effects for you.
There you go, 38terra.com. There's a link down below in the show description and in the episode notes. Also, there is a link to pick up your tickets for the Power Foods Revolution. Man, I wish you could be here for this one, Dr. B. The Power Foods Revolution at the National Press Club, March 26th, just a couple of blocks away from the White House, to celebrate the launch of Dr. Neil Barnard's new book, The Power Foods Diet. You can join me, Dr. Barnard, Chef Dustin Harder, Stephanie Ignafo from Plantspiration, all going to be there having a glorious time taping an episode of the show and talking about the foods that you should be really incorporating into your diet that can help you lose weight and optimize your health. And by the way, the whole idea behind the Power Foods diet, cut the string on that yo-yo. No more going up and down the scale. So join us, pcrm.org/events, or click that other link in the episode notes to reserve your seat today. Going to be a good time. Wish you could be there, Dr. B.
Wish I could too, Chuck. Before we go real quick, Chuck, I think you know what I want to do. Can I get your hand up? Let's bring it in. We'll do it together. This show has been too sweet.
If you know, then you know. Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, you are the best, man. I appreciate you more than you'll ever know.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, everyone. Great to see y'all today.
And to the crew behind the scenes, thank you guys so very much for making the magic happen. And to all you exam roomies, thanks for all of your wonderful questions today. You guys make this job just the coolest thing in the world. And for everyone at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. We will talk to you again very soon. But until then, keep it plant-based.